Hey there, have things changed this week? They sure have. It's kind of a different world this week than it was even last Monday. I never thought I might get mugged for a roll of toilet paper, and speaking of that, I'm just gonna hide this down here before somebody sees it and takes it away from me. But I am getting a lot of questions about how this change is affecting our real estate market, and there really are 5 reasons why this market and the way that the shifts in the economy have occurred this week is very different from the last housing crash. So I'm going to explain to you what they are. The first big difference between the situation we're in today and the way things were 14 years ago is that mortgage standards are much stricter than they were in the time leading up to the housing bubble, the last recession. This market, it's a lot harder to get a mortgage. In fact, it is harder to get a mortgage today than it was before the last housing bubble even began. There are stricter standards and better qualified buyers in the market today. The second reason that this market is vastly different from the way it was before the housing crash in 2008 and the years leading up is that prices aren't soaring out of control. And I hear you, you think that they're really going up so fast, but the reality is it was way worse in the 6 years leading up to the last housing bubble. It was climbing between 8 and 12% per year on a national basis. For this time, we have only been climbing for the last 6 years between 4 and 6%. Locally here in Salt Lake, it has been more, but that's because in Salt Lake, we are 50,000 houses short of families who need homes. It's been a supply and demand issue, not a speculation issue. And on that point, we currently have a housing shortage, not a housing surplus. In the bubble that we had 14 years ago, there was a housing surplus. Individuals were buying 2 and 3 homes as speculation or investment, not because they needed them. Today, as I mentioned, we are 50,000 units short of families who need homes here in the Salt Lake area, and across the nation, there has been a housing shortage. This is a market driven by need, not speculation. While it may be surprising, homes are more affordable now than they were during the housing bubble 14 years ago. The reason is that mortgage rates back then were 6%. Today, we're sitting around 3.5% on mortgage rates. Also, the housing prices haven't been climbing as fast as they did leading up to the last bubble, as I mentioned earlier. This means that back then, housing prices got to the point where they would take an average of 25.4% of somebody's income to buy that house. It would go toward their housing expenses. However, today, we're sitting around 14% on the national average. That is a huge difference in how housing is taxing families in their monthly spending. The 5th reason that this market is vastly different than the bubble that led to the crash 14 years ago is that people back then were using their homes as an ATM. Basically, either refinancing or taking another equity line to fund their lifestyle, to buy a boat, go on vacation, pay off bills. They were cashing out at record numbers back then. In fact, today, homeowners have taken $500 billion less equity out of their homes in the last recent years than they did leading up to the crash 14 years ago. And what that means is that people have more equity left in their homes. On average, 50% of the population has 50% equity in their homes. So that means people are not going to be inclined to just walk away from their mortgages and allow them to default. They have equity. They have essentially grown in their wealth by virtue of the homes they owned over the last 6 years, instead of cashing it all out and living on a shoestring. The current economic turmoil that we are seeing is very different from the crash that occurred 14 years ago. This market is based on need. People still need places to live. That is the reality of it. But if you have questions about how this shift relates to you and your home, all the way down to your zip code, I am happy to talk to you about the specifics of your position in your home, or if you're considering buying or selling, what that looks like for you. Just give me a call and I'll be glad to go over it with you in a brief phone call.